Give me 1 second. I'm getting your music. Why is it not working? Oh, there it is. Yay! Okay, there you go. You should hear some nice lo-fi music. I'm just using my Spirit City lo-fi game for this. Beautiful game. We love it. 10 out of 10. We use it during book club. We like it a lot. Hello! Welcome to the first episode of Royal Readings. This is where I, a royal, read books and talk about them because I love books. Listen. When you're a royal like me and you have such a massive royal library and you have access to so many fantastic stories, you have to read them all. It's just, you have to. But anyway, today, we are reviewing an amazing series that I read. I read all 4 books in like a week. Literally, in like a week. We are reviewing the 4 Horsemen series by Laura Thalassa. The books are Pestilence, War, Famine, and Death. And they are so good. Oh my god, they are so good. Okay, so the genre / kind of just like overall themes and topics of this book is dystopian. This is absolutely a dystopian world. This is a dystopian setting. This is romance as well, though, and it's definitely enemies to lovers. But the general focus of the book is that the horsemen show up, and when they first arrive, they take out all electricity, like all technology, basically, just gone. So the day that they first arrive is when what is considered the apocalypse starts. So the apocalypse begins with the loss of technology. This is airplanes falling out of the skies, vehicles just suddenly not working and crashing into each other and buildings and people. This is lights going out. This is like lights exploding in a sense, kind of like just bursting. This is cell phones no longer working. Like we revert back to essentially the biblical days of no technology. We learn in this book that people begin to communicate actually with messenger pigeons. That is one way that people learn to communicate with each other again in this post-apocalyptic state. And we actually get to see several parts of the world in this. So we're going to start with the first book, which is Pestilence. In Pestilence, we start out in Canada. We start out actually in eastern Canada. In just a small town, and we are faced with a group of 4 firefighters. And these 4 firefighters have stayed when nobody else has. Everybody has evacuated, and these 4 firefighters have stayed to make sure that everybody was able to evacuate safely. And as they are sitting around the table, knowing that Pestilence is on his way, his route that he is riding is going to head straight through their town, they are drawing straws to determine who is going to enact their reckless plan. And of the 4 firefighters, Sarah is the one to draw the unlucky straw. So the other 3 pack up and leave, and Sarah is left alone in this town, and it is up to her to kill Pestilence. That is the task that she has stayed behind for. So Sarah heads out to the highway where Pestilence is sure to ride by because they know the route that he is taking. They've been tracking it. And they know that he will be following this. Because in this point, we are on year 5 of the Horsemen. So it's been 5 years since the Horsemen originally rode. And literally, they rode and they disappeared. So that was called the Awakening. So that was when they first appeared. Then we have Pestilence's Awakening. Pestilence was the first horseman to wake up after they magically disappeared. And Pestilence begins spreading the plague, which the humans have come to call the fever. So as he's spreading the fever, some technology at this point still works. Not well, but it still works. So some TVs, they still are able to get a little bit of signal and things like that because we're still pretty early on. As the stories go on, all the technology just gets wiped out. But in this first book, we have a little bit of technology and they're able to see news still. News is still able to be spread. So that's how they know where the Horseman is and where he's going to be heading. So Sarah sets up camp along the highway, knowing that she will encounter the Horseman, and she is armed with nothing but a shotgun. When the time comes and she hears the galloping of the horse, she prepares herself, and she does it. She shoots that She shoots that shotgun. She shoots him point blank in the chest. He falls off his horse, and she approaches him. And she shoots a few more times, and she hears him groan, and she hears him beg for mercy. But she is resolute in what she knows she has to do to save the world. And as much as it hurts her being a firefighter to do this, she douses his body in lighter fluid and burns him to death. Now, however, she did not finish killing the horse, and she feels that she does need to finish killing the horse, but she's a little stressed out and chooses to kill the horse in the morning. So she goes to bed in her tent. And when she awakes, Pestilence is staring down at her. His body is burned, and there are obvious bullet wounds. But he's here in front of her, alive. And she does not know how to react to that. And so Pestilence takes her as prisoner for trying to kill him. Because we learn in this moment that the Horsemen cannot be killed. They can be hurt, but they cannot be killed. So Sarah becomes his prisoner. And she's forced to follow with him as he spreads the plague across the world, heading west across Canada, and then eventually down into the western coast of the United States. And as they go on this journey, things slowly begin to change. Sarah ends up going from a prisoner to a reluctant captee, in a sense. While she's treated as a prisoner at first, she's treated pretty poorly, and she ends up getting hurt pretty badly. And Pestilence realizes that he might not want to kill her. So he keeps her alive, and because he's the spreader of plague, any wounds that she gets, he's able to keep them from getting infected. They don't have to really be treated. They just have to be wrapped in bandages because they will not get infected with him. So that's a nice thing. But yeah, basically the reason that we learn that Pestilence goes to such lengths to keep her alive is because when Pestilence awoke after Sarah's little assassination attempt, he was fully going to kill her. He was hellbent on killing her. And as he approached her tent in the morning light, the angelic word for mercy shone down on her tent, a message from God. Which he thought was ironic, given that he begged for mercy and did not receive any. But God made him show this woman mercy, and so he kept her alive, and eventually his feelings changed, and he realized that maybe humanity wasn't all bad, and eventually her feelings for him changed, and they fall in love, and he forsakes his purpose and stops spreading the plague, and they fall in love, and then they have a baby. I mean, what? Yeah, no, they have kids. But yeah, so he gives up his powers, his purpose, and his immortality for her at the end because he falls in love with her. And they're happy and all for a few years. And then we actually get a 3-year time skip. So we go from year 5 of the Horsemen to year 8 of the Horsemen in their epilogue, where they are happy and the world is recovering from the plague and things are still in a post-apocalyptic state, but settling back into somewhat level of normalcy. But then, pestilence feels it. War has awakened. And we move to book 2. And in book 2, we travel, instead of being in Canada and the United States, we are in Jerusalem. So we are taking place in Jerusalem, is the main city where we start, but we get to go all over the area, including down to Egypt. So it starts in Jerusalem and it will end in Egypt. And I think eventually it goes, like, I think in, like, the epilogue, if I'm remembering correctly, it goes back to Jerusalem, kind of, or, like, a city near it, because there's a whole thing. But anyway, we meet right away from the get-go our main character of book 2. Her name is Miriam. Miriam is an orphan because of the events of the apocalypse. She lost her father on the day that the Horsemen arrived, when technology went out. He was hit by a bus. And she lost her mother and her sister when they were trying to flee and get away from the path of destruction set upon by war. And so Miriam is the lone survivor of her family, but she has a scar on her neck that's pretty big because of everything that happened. And the way that she has found to survive in this apocalyptic state is by crafting arrows. Her mother and father were both teachers at a university, and her mother had, like, books on, like, medieval weaponry and stuff, which she found very fascinating, and she had read at a young age. And so she learned to make bows, arrows, spears, knives, everything out of, like, wood and rocks and stuff. So that was her profession. She made weapons, which in a time where technology doesn't work and, like, modern day firearms and explosives are becoming less and less effective, things like bows and arrows are very, very important for survival. They're important for hunting for food. They are important for fending off people that are terrible. So this is how she has survived and made somewhat of a living for herself. And one morning, as she is out gathering supplies, gathering sticks from her usual area, gathering stones and stuff, she hears hoofbeats. She ducks into an abandoned building, and she peeks out the window, and she sees a blood-red horse approaching with a large figure on it. And she thinks to herself, there's no way. That can't be. That can't be War. That can't be. Why would he be here? What do you mean he's here? But it is. And behind him is a stampede of more horses, for War has an army with him. And War heads straight for her city, Jerusalem. And she is given the choice. Like, she's in an opportunity. She's like, I could go back. I could try to stop them, but I'm just one person. Or I could leave. I could do the smart thing. I could leave. She went to the fucking city. Miriam books it straight for the city. And she goes back, and she runs back to her apartment to try and grab weapons, because obviously, like, she's a weapon maker. She knows she has weapons there. She gets there. Obviously, other people know she's a weapon maker. Her place has been a little ransacked for weapons, but she has a secret stash. She grabs her secret stash. She's armed with weapons, and she heads out onto the street and tries to start picking off soldiers when she comes face to face with War. War ends up cornering her, and this man holds his sword up, and then he puts it down, and he looks at her, and he's like, "You're my wife." And she's like, the woman was too stunned to speak. She's like, "What?" And he's like, "My wife, come with me." War is so fucking funny. He's hilarious. I think War was probably, like, one of my favorites because he was just so funny. Just gives her absolutely zero explanation. It is just like, this is my wife. Hello. And so she's taken back to his war camp, where she learns that in every city that he pillages, he brings people to his war camp, and they either die or they swear fealty. And that's how his army grows and gains people. And yeah, she kind of just is forced to go along with the whole wife thing, to keep her head. But eventually she decides to try and use her position to fight back. So she gets War to let her go with the army on their city raids. And when she's by herself during those, she starts like picking off his own soldiers and killing them. And he knows, obviously, and he just kind of lets her do it. But like eventually it gets back to her and there's some backlash and stuff. But it's the same concept though. They do fall in love, and eventually things change. And it's the same thing. War renounces his purpose, he gives up his powers, and he gives up his immortality to be with her. And then we go on to Famine. Famine is also known as the Reaper. And in this book, we are taking place in Brazil. And we meet our main character, Anna, who is a sex worker. And Anna is 22. I believe all the FMCs were 22 in their main books. But Anna's 22, and she had been working for 5 years. So that means she was 17 when she started down this line, because she was an orphan and had nothing. And the reason that she's an orphan is because of famine. When she was 17, and she was young and she didn't really know any better, she was coming home one day during a rainstorm, and she found a mutilated body. But the mutilated body groaned, and she realized it was still alive. And she looked at this horror, and she's like, she knew in her heart that what it was like to be somebody who was unwanted. She was living with an aunt who hated her, who didn't want her, who made her feel like a burden. And she knew that if somebody had found her in a state like that, she would want help. She would want compassion. And so she offered that to this man. And it wasn't until she pulled him into a shack and was comforting him and trying to make things better that she realized who he was, that he was Famine, that he was one of the 4 horsemen. So she had saved Famine's life, and he had recovered, and he kind of destroyed her whole town and tried to take her with him. And she was absolutely not having it, so she didn't go with, and that's how she ended up in the line of work that she did. And now he was coming to... Hi, Otter. I hope you're having a good day at work. So now he was coming to her city again, this new city that she was living in. And the town was preparing offerings to try and appease Famine, to try and make him happy so that he would not destroy the crops, so that he wouldn't take everything from them. And Anna's master of the brothel was offering her. And unfortunately, though, Anna had hoped that Famine would remember her. But upon their reunion, he did not remember right away. It wasn't until she was stabbed multiple times and brought back to life by death that she had recovered and decided to make it her life's purpose to hunt down Famine and get revenge and kill him. So, that's exactly what she did. She caught up to him after she recovered. She snuck into his house and she put a knife to his throat. And he just kind of laughed at her. And then she revealed who she was, and he remembered. And he suddenly was very interested because he he still cared for her. This was the one human who had saved his life, who had shown him kindness. And he had her back suddenly, except for now she hated him and wanted to kill him. So thus starts their complicated relationship of technically her being a prisoner in a sense, but it was more willing. She gets a roof and food, and she thinks that maybe she can bring back the kind-sided horseman that she saw when she was in that shed at 17. And so that's what she tries to do. She tries to change him. However, she also does make a bunch of sex jokes, which is funny. Her like whole motto is a blowjob good enough to save the world or something. It was really funny and I liked it. She's funny. I liked Anna. She was one of my favorite FMCs. I think she was really funny. And yeah, so again though, same concept, but a little bit of a twist. Famine wants to give up his powers and his immortality at the end because he loves Anna. However, unlike Pestilence and War, he has not come to believe in humanity. He only believes in Anna. And because of this, death denies him the opportunity to strip himself of his immortality and be with her, like his brothers. And for the first time, we don't have a time skip. Pestilence to War had a time skip, and War to Famine had a time skip. Famine to Death has 0 time skip. Death appears in person. He awakens right then and there. And he begins his mission when he sees that Famine will not continue his purpose. But he's still denying Famine mortality. And he tries to use Anna as leverage. But Famine is able to get Anna back and keep her out of harm's way. And Death simply goes on his mission. And that's where we shift into Book 4 for Death. In Book 4, we meet the last FMC, Lazarus. Lazarus cannot die. As a child, Lazarus was found after Pestilence had traveled through a city and killed her birth parents. Lazarus did not die to the plague. Growing up, Lazarus fell out of a tree and broke her neck, and yet Lazarus did not die. And when death rode through the city that she was living in, and everybody around her dropped dead, she looked the horseman right in the eyes and stood in front of him, living, unable to be killed by his powers. And Death realizes that this is the woman that God has sent, just like his brothers. This is his woman. And at first he tries to reject it. He runs away. He does not want to be distracted from his purpose. He does not want to fall like his brothers did. So he runs. But she is angry. Lazarus has a vendetta. Lazarus spends a month tracking him down, following his movements to the best of her abilities until she finally catches up with him again. And she tries to kill him, and she hurts him. And then eventually he goes and snaps her neck and realizes that she also can't die. And so suddenly we have 2 immortal beings fighting each other for months on end. And eventually she starts to stay with Death, just briefly, until the other horsemen show up because they want to kill him. When they show up and everything starts fighting, Lazarus takes this opportunity to run. She runs away from Death. She runs away from the other horsemen because they want to use her to get to Death. When she runs, she finds a town that Death had already touched. And she hears a baby crying. And she thinks, there's no way. There can't be another baby. There can't be somebody else like me. Somebody who was able to survive death. But there is a baby. And so she takes this baby. His name is Ben. And she cares for him. And she runs from Death for 6 months to protect her son. Because this is her son now. And she loves him. And she cares for him. And she's going to protect him at all costs. And she doesn't know if he's immortal like her. And she doesn't want to take that risk. But eventually, he gets sick. And he's dying. And there's nothing that can be done. And Death appears, and he explains that he's here for Ben, and that it's his time to go. And Lazarus is distraught. She doesn't want to lose her son. But she remembers that the Horsemen were nearby, and that Famine still has powers, and if Death won't heal her baby, maybe she can convince Famine to. So she goes to them, and she makes a deal. She will seduce Death to get him to stop his purpose, if they heal Ben and take him somewhere safe. So they do. And so begins her growing close with Death in an attempt to get him to stop. However, when all is lost, and it's at the point, it's the last judgment, it wasn't enough. He still is set on his purpose. He's still set despite the fact that he loves her. And when she's faced with the choice of... Sorry, I hit my desk. Ow. When she's faced with the choices of killing him or ending herself, she prays to God to strip her of her immortality, and she plunges the knife through her own heart. And suddenly she's dying, actually dying for the first time in her life. And Death realizes what it means to lose someone that you care for. He realizes what it means to be part of humanity. And that's what gets him to change his mind. And so he takes her back. He strips Famine of his immortality. He strips himself of his immortality and his power. And they live until they die. And that's the series. And it's so cool. And so one of the things that I loved about this series and about these 4 books is that the premise of the book was the same. So we had like the same concept of obviously like the enemies to lovers thing. We got to experience different locations. Death went back to America, so I forgot to mention that, but Death went back to America, so we were back in America twice. But we had a good amount of different locations across the world that this happened in to show that this was like a worldwide apocalypse. And I think that was really cool. But like, despite the similar concepts, the girls all went through something different. And I think that is really an interesting thing to see. Sarah, she was dragged by horse, forced to run while tied to a horse, and things like that. And like, she had injuries. She was shot in the stomach. So she had all of that. Miriam, so Miriam actually got blown up while pregnant. And that's what war had to bargain for, was to get them back. So that was very different. And like, she wasn't a prisoner as much of just like, I mean, she was a prisoner in a sense, but like a prisoner of war. And like, it was pretty different, like with the war camp thing. And with Famine, it was also just like really different because they had past experience. This wasn't their first time meeting. And with Death, it was 2 immortals facing off with each other. As I mentioned from Pestilence as well. Sorry, I had to take a breath there. As I mentioned with Pestilence, there was an angelic word as well. Sarah's was mercy, and the whole point of the book was about Pestilence learning mercy. Miriam's was surrender, and her word was displayed in the scar on her throat. Her scar was in the shape of the angelic word for surrender, and it wasn't until War surrendered and gave up everything that we were able to reach our conclusion. And then I'm trying to remember what Famine's was. hang on. Let me see what famine's angelic word. Because she said, so Anna said her angelic word in her sleep when she was healing him when she was 17. I'm just trying to remember what her word was. I cannot for the life of me remember what her word was. I cannot find it. Okay. I'm really annoyed that I can't find it because I want to know, like, I want to give their words, but I cannot for the life of me figure out what her word was. But okay. But yeah, so she said hers, and then the last angelic word, though, since I can't remember famine's, Death's was love. Death had to figure out what love was. He thought for sure that the angelic word that he was given was life. And honestly, as a reader, I thought for sure that the word was life too, because he represented death and Lazarus represented life. I genuinely, as the reader, thought that the word was life, and Death thought so too, but the word was love. And I loved that twist at the end. It was so beautiful. It made me so happy. It was gorgeous. But yeah. Some interesting facts from this series as well. If you noticed, as I was talking about things, all of the FMCs have biblical names. Okay, apparently my fishing has just reconnected. I don't know why it disconnected. So all of the characters have biblical names. We have Sarah, we have Miriam, we have Anna, and we have Lazarus. So that was something that I found really interesting, and I actually didn't notice it right away. It was after I read Pestilence and was telling Arch about it that he pointed out that Sarah was a biblical name. And it clicked in my head because, okay, I hate that this was my connection point, but hi, I watch Has Been Hotel, and so Sarah, the seraphim. So anyway, that clicked in my head that Sarah was a biblical name. And then as I continued to read the books, and I saw Miriam and she was very strongly represented by the hand of Miriam. And we had Anna, and then we had Lazarus. I was like, okay, yeah, no, these are biblical names. It was very cool. Another thing that was really interesting to me is the FMCs, they all asked their guys about God. Because obviously, like, the four horsemen are messengers of God in a sense. So they were asking questions about God and everything. And Sarah was the first, obviously, and she refers to God as a he, as most people do. And Pestilence explains that God doesn't really have like a gender. God is just God. But it's okay to refer to him as he, makes it easy, and so Pestilence would continue to refer to God as he. However, in Death refers to God as she. And Death says that she is the universe. She is everything. And I thought that was really cool because of like the concept of like Mother Nature and everything. So it was really cool to see like how differently they like talked about God from like each perspective, and I thought that was really interesting. But yeah, my overall ratings of the books, I am giving a 5-star to Pestilence. It drew me in, it hooked me from the beginning. It was really well written. I loved the story. I loved the twists and turns. I loved when I thought the book was going to end and I looked down and realized that I still had like 30% to go and I didn't know like what direction we were going to take. And I thought it was so good. So I'm giving Pestilence a 5 out of 5 stars. Loved it, and I would absolutely recommend it to people who like this type stuff. For War, I am giving War a 4 out of 5. I liked it. I did. War was so goofy. Um, and I think the only thing that like threw me off a little bit was just like his goofiness a little bit. I loved that he was goofy, but like going from Pestilence to just such a goofy guy was like such a change, and like I don't think I was mentally prepared for it, but it was still such an incredible read. War really grew a lot in the book. I think he learned a lot, and it was still incredible. For Famine, I'm also giving it a 4 out of 5 stars. I liked the concept. I loved the whole like they knew each other in the past and everything. But like I don't know. I think for me it might have just been like there was a lot of like sex jokes. It like the whole concept of like Anna was making sex jokes to Famine and stuff, and like it was funny at first, but it got like just a little bit like cringy and repetitive later on into the book. But it wasn't bad, and it didn't kill the read for me. Like it didn't make me DNF or anything. I finished it, I loved it and everything, and it was still a really good book. And for Death, I'm giving it 5 out of 5 as well. So 2 5s, 2 4s. Death was a perfect end to the series. We got to see something really cool with the whole two immortals fighting each other thing. And I think like this one really solidified the whole enemies to lovers thing, because like it wasn't just I tried to kill you and you took me prisoner. It was I tried to kill you. You killed me. I woke up. I hunted you down. I tried to kill you. It was a repetitive cycle. Like they were enemies. They were in battle for a year. They fought each other for a full year before things finally started to change. And I think that it was like the strongest enemies to lovers that happened. And I really liked that one. I think Death was my favorite overall. Pestilence was probably my second favorite. War was my third, and Famine I would say was my least favorite. But again, I loved them all. I think they were an incredible series, and I was really happy that I got to read it. I definitely recommend this series to anybody who likes like apocalyptic dystopian society books. If you love romance, if you like enemies to lovers, there's good spice in these books. Overall, I would say as a series, the spice rating's probably about a 3. They definitely don't focus on the spice until like obviously like the lovers part starts happening. But like it's not bad. It's good. I like it. I think it's tasteful spice. I think that it was great. There was a line in at the end of Death that made me laugh so much. We got to see the original girls, like the other 3, and one of them shouts out pussy power or something, and it was just really funny because basically the premise is the power of pussy saves the world. And it was just really funny overall. So good read, solid 10 out of 10, loved it. But yeah, so if this is the type of series that you are interested in, I definitely recommend giving this a read. This was a recommendation for me. My friend recommended this to me when I was in a reading slump. So if you find yourself in a slump and you need something to pull you out, this is a completed series. It's available on Kindle Unlimited, and I recommend it highly to pull yourself out of any slump, or if you just want to read a good series. Anyway, that is it for our first episode of Royal Readings. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you guys next time. Bye-bye!